I thought my late night calls would stay secret until he played them at family breakfast. Hi Reddit, my name is Ava, and I'm 32 years old. I am married to a 34 years old realtor. My husband's name is Eric. I met Eric through a friend from college. It wasn't love at first sight, but it felt stable from the beginning. He was calm, smart, and patient in ways that made him stand out. We didn't have wild chemistry, but we matched. I liked that about us. Our relationship grew slowly, the way it should, with late-night talks about hopes and fears, weekend hikes where we lost track of time, and small moments that felt like the foundation of forever. When he proposed, it felt like the natural next step. I said yes, believing I had finally left the past behind. After a month of the proposal, we moved in together, and by the end of that year, we were married. Our wedding was small, just family, a few friends, a simple hall, and a short ceremony. No drama, no surprises. That was how most of our relationship felt, clean and quiet. We bought a modest home in the suburbs, close to his office and not too far from mine. We both worked full-time, kept the house organized, paid our bills on time, and saw our families on weekends. We weren't excited, but we were steady. The first year was smooth. We cooked together sometimes, watched shows in the evenings, and took short weekend trips when we could afford them. We talked about starting a family, but agreed to wait. I was focused on my career, and he was climbing his own ladder in finance. We didn't argue much. We didn't talk much either. I thought that was normal. Over time, the silence between us grew, not in a hostile way, but in a quiet, distant one. I honestly didn't know what happened between us. We stopped asking each other about our days. We went to bed at the same time, but rarely fell asleep touching. We sat in the same room, but looked at different screens. He wasn't cruel, and I wasn't bitter. We just seemed to exist near each other, not with each other. I told myself this was what mature love looked like. Comfortable, predictable, stable. Work became my outlet. I had a good position in the operations department of a medium-sized firm. It was busy but manageable, and I liked being efficient. My coworkers were fine. I wasn't close to anyone outside of our group lunches and occasional project check-ins. Most days, I came in, did my job, and left. I had nothing to complain about. Sometimes I took extra shifts so as to not go back home early. Home became boring for me, and I needed to escape. I felt like I was suffocating. Well, in the actual sense I was. Eric never questioned me. He trusted me completely, and I had no reason to make him feel otherwise. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I didn't go out drinking after work. I didn't hide my phone or come home late. Despite that, the house was boring and I felt lonely. I didn't have the intention to go out to party or to be with men. I don't fancy any of that. I was never that type. But I started going down that route slowly with my late night calls. Guys, if anything, I was the more responsible one. He sometimes forgot dates or fell asleep on the couch before dinner. I carried most of the emotional weight in our home, or at least that's how I saw it. The quiet moments grew longer. Some nights I would lie awake while he snored beside me, wondering if I had made a mistake. Not a huge, dramatic mistake, but a slow one, the kind that takes years to fully unfold. I missed feeling interesting. I missed being seen. I missed the kind of conversation that wasn't about grocery lists or mortgage payments, but I never said any of this out loud. I wasn't sure if it mattered enough to bring up. We still went to service on Sundays. We still smiled in photos. Our families still complimented us on how well we worked together. My mother once said she admired how calm our marriage seemed. I nodded along, not knowing how to explain that calm can sometimes feel like nothing at all. Still, I didn't think anything was broken. I believed we were okay. I believed it enough to keep showing up every day and acting like we were. I thought this was the kind of life people settled into. You find someone reliable, you build a life, you accept the silence. No one talks about the stretch of years when nothing happens, when love becomes a habit. I had nothing to compare it to. Eric wasn't mean. He didn't cheat. He didn't lie. He just didn't look at me the way he used to. And over time, I stopped expecting him to. When he would fall asleep early, I would sit in the living room and scroll through my phone. I'd watch videos, answer messages, or catch up on work emails. Sometimes I would just sit in the dark with my thoughts, not really thinking anything deep, just floating. It felt like a quiet corner of life where I didn't have to be a wife or a worker or anything at all. There were moments when I felt like I was fading inside my own life. Not dramatically, not in a way anyone else would notice, just slowly. I was present in every room, but not always in myself. I smiled when I needed to. I answered when spoken to, but there were entire days when I felt like I had nothing new to offer, nothing exciting to say, nothing to look forward to. Eric didn't seem to notice, or maybe he did, but didn't know how to ask. We had become two people walking the same hallway in different directions. I wasn't angry about it. I wasn't even sad. It just felt like a slow dimming, and I accepted it. Looking back, I think I ignored certain signs on purpose. I told myself that real love doesn't need constant attention. I believed it was enough to share a roof, a bed, and a routine. I believed being a good wife meant showing up and staying quiet when things got dull. But the truth is, a part of me had gone quiet too, and I didn't know how to get it back. Some weekends we visited his parents. We'd sit around the table, laugh at old stories, and pretend things were as perfect as they looked on the surface. His mom always said we seemed like a team. I smiled at that, because it was easier than explaining we were more like coworkers than a couple. We were polite and predictable, and from the outside, we probably looked like the picture of a functioning marriage. There were no big arguments, no cheating scandals, no dramatic fallouts, just small shifts that added up, days when we didn't touch, nights when we didn't talk, moments when I felt more like a ghost in the house than someone who belonged there. I kept telling myself it was just a phase, that things would get better when we traveled more, or once we had a child, or when life slowed down a bit. But life never really slowed down, and we never really talked about the space growing between us. That was what our marriage looked like from the outside, calm, neat, steady, and for a long time, I convinced myself that was enough. After a couple of years into our marriage, work started to take up more of my time. Our company was restructuring, and I was assigned to lead a new project that had a tight deadline. That's when I met Jason. He was in the marketing department, a few years older than me, with a calm demeanor and easy laugh. We had several meetings together, and from the start, our working relationship was smooth. Jason was reliable and quick to respond. He was the kind of colleague who made the workday feel lighter, even when things get hectic. We exchanged emails about the project daily, and sometimes messages after hours to keep everything moving. What began as professional communication slowly became something more frequent and personal. I remember the first time Jason called me late one night. It was about a report that needed revision before the morning meeting. The call was brief and focused, just clarifying details. But after that, we started talking more often outside of office hours. Sometimes after a long day, it felt easier to vent to him than to Eric. Jason never crossed any lines. He was respectful, and I always kept reminding myself that he was married and had a peaceful home, which I could not afford to lose, but I eventually did. I told myself this was just friendship, a professional bond that had grown into mutual support. At home, Eric was quiet and distracted, absorbed in his own world. I craved connection, someone who listened. Our late-night conversations became a routine. We talked about deadlines, presentations, and occasionally shared little things about our lives, a stressful family situation, an accomplishment at work, a new restaurant we tried. Those conversations gave me a small sense of escape from the dullness that had settled over my marriage. I felt guilty sometimes, especially when Eric would ask if I was busy or tired. I never told him about Jason, not because I was hiding anything physical, but because I knew he wouldn't understand why I needed these calls. I was afraid of making him feel inadequate, or worse, like our marriage was failing. Jason's attention was gentle and genuine. He listened without judgment. When I told him about a tough day, he didn't offer advice or criticism. He simply said he understood. That was something I hadn't felt from Eric in a long time. With Jason, I could be honest without fear. At first, I convinced myself these conversations were harmless. I wasn't cheating. I wasn't planning anything. I was just lonely. But the line between friendship and something more blurred slowly, without fanfare. Sometimes I caught myself looking forward to Jason's calls. His voice on the other end of the line was warm, a comfort during nights when the house was quiet and Eric was asleep. I told myself it was just a human connection, nothing more. The late-night calls grew longer. We shared more about our hopes and fears. I told him about my dissatisfaction with the silence in my marriage. He shared his struggles balancing work and family. We found comfort in knowing someone else was dealing with the same kind of loneliness. I only met Jason outside work once, and I made sure of it. Our first and last meeting was awkward. Our emotions got the best of us, and we kissed. It was brief, and I ran out of there. That was the last time it happened. I didn't want to cross boundaries. I wasn't interested in breaking up my marriage or his. I just wanted to feel seen. I wanted to be reminded that I was still a person with desires and feelings beyond my responsibilities. But things got heated up. Jason and I never spoke about it, and we moved past that. But as time passed, I started to notice how much energy I gave to those calls. I was more distracted during the day, thinking about what I might say next. I checked my phone more often. I felt a mix of excitement and shame that I didn't fully understand. I told myself that I kept everything in control. It was a line I promised myself not to cross again. I believed that as long as it was just talking moving forward, it wasn't betrayal. Eric remained unaware. He still came home late from work, tired and silent. Sometimes I wondered if he suspected something, but he never said a word. Maybe he thought I was just busy with my job. Maybe he didn't want to confront the growing distance between us. One night, I realized I had been waiting for Jason's call more than for Eric's return. That was when the guilt became harder to ignore. I felt like I was living a double life, one where I pretended everything was fine at home while craving a connection that Eric no longer gave me. Still, I held on to the hope that it was just a phase, that the calls would end once the project was over, that I would find my way back to Eric, that the silence between us was temporary. But deep down, I knew things had changed. I had found something outside my marriage that made me feel alive again, even if only through a phone line, and that scared me more than I wanted to admit. The late-night calls with Jason were no longer just about work. They became a quiet thread weaving through the long, lonely hours after Eric had gone to bed. We talked about everything: hopes, regrets, frustrations, the kind of things I hadn't shared with Eric in years. Those conversations were like a secret world, a refuge from the silence at home. I found myself thinking about Jason during the day and the kiss. His voice echoed in my mind during boring meetings or while folding laundry. I caught myself smiling at my phone when his name flashed on the screen and whenever I saw him at work. The guilt was there, but so was a strange comfort I hadn't felt in a long time. Slowly, I started hiding my phone more. I deleted texts after reading them, erased call logs, and answered his calls only when I was sure Eric was out of the room. I was careful not to leave any trace, but the effort itself was exhausting. It felt like walking a tightrope every day, balancing between honesty and deception. Eric noticed the change. He didn't say much at first, but his eyes would linger on me longer than usual. He asked casually if I was tired or stressed. When I checked my phone during dinner, he gave a quiet sigh. His silence was heavier than any accusation. He began asking small questions about my evenings, if I was working late, who I was talking to. I deflected with vague answers, hoping to keep the peace. But his questions kept coming, gentle but persistent, as if he was trying to piece together something he didn't fully understand. The distance between us grew. Our conversations were shorter, and when we did speak, there was an edge of caution, as if we were both trying not to say what we felt. I hated the way things had changed, but I was trapped between my longing for connection and the fear of losing Eric. One morning, everything came crashing down. We sat at the kitchen table for breakfast. Eric was quiet, more so than usual. Then, without a word, he reached for his phone and played a recording. Jason's voice filled the room, clear, familiar, intimate. It was one of those late-night calls, the ones I thought were private. I was shocked. I never expected that Eric would pay attention to all those calls to the extent that he would record it. I remembered that particular conversation. Jason and I almost flirted with each other on the phone. It was late at night, and everywhere was quiet. As usual, I was in the sitting room when Jason and I were talking. Eric was in the room sleeping. Well, that was what I had thought. I never knew that he was awake. Eric watched me, his eyes heavy with pain and disappointment. The silence that followed was suffocating. No accusations, no shouting, just what had been uncovered. I realized then that Eric had been listening, waiting for a moment like this. My secret was no longer mine. That morning broke something between us. The fragile trust we had left shattered quietly, but completely. I felt exposed and vulnerable, the illusion of control slipping away. The lines I thought I had kept clear were blurred beyond repair. In the days that followed, the house felt unbearable for me. The atmosphere was cold and silent. Eric and I moved around each other like strangers sharing the same space. The calls with Jason stopped. I had to put an end to it. Even though we started off as colleagues, talking about work, I knew that it was more than that. I got too attached to him, and I needed nobody to tell me that. I would be deceiving myself if I said that our conversations were work-related. Eric sensed it and didn't say anything. I didn't take his silence seriously. At that time, I also didn't think that what I was doing was wrong. I had wanted to feel alive again, to find someone who saw me. But then, all I felt was the weight of what I had lost. After that morning at the breakfast table, things became quieter than ever. I thought I knew what silence felt like in a marriage, but this was different. It wasn't empty or dull. It was sharp. Every quiet moment seemed to say something we were too tired or afraid to speak out loud. The sound of coffee pouring into a mug or the closing of a door had weight now. We stopped asking each other about our day. We stopped pretending. Eric didn't confront me right away. He didn't yell, didn't demand explanations. He didn't even ask questions. He just moved around me. He would come home later than usual, eat less, speak less, and sometimes walk right past me as if I weren't there. I noticed the way he looked at the bedroom door before stepping in, like he was bracing himself for something. He had always been good at hiding his emotions, but this time I could see them surface, raw and unfiltered, even in the way he avoided my eyes. I tried to speak to him a few times. I started sentences without knowing how to finish them. He would glance up at me, wait a few seconds, then return to whatever he was doing. I knew that silence was an answer. He wasn't ready to hear anything I had to say, or maybe he had already heard enough. Each day passed like I was holding my breath. I kept thinking he might explode, or ask me to leave, or disappear without warning. But instead he stayed. He was just less of himself. And in return, I became less of myself too. One evening, I was folding laundry in our bedroom when he finally spoke. His voice was even, almost too calm. He asked if I had anything I wanted to say. I put the clothes down and nodded slowly, unsure of where to start. I told him I hadn't planned for anything to happen. I told him I felt invisible for so long, and Jason became a friend when I didn't know I needed one. I told him that we just kissed once, and it was awkward. I confessed to him about that kiss, and lied about how terrible it was. But even as I said it, I knew I was lying. Eric listened. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he looked tired more than angry. He said I had the audacity to kiss another man behind his back, that he thought it was only about trust and sharing parts of myself with someone else that I never gave him the chance to see. He said he could have handled the truth, but what broke him was being excluded from it and lied to. That conversation didn't solve anything. It only made what had happened feel more real. But it was the first time in weeks that we spoke without avoiding the obvious, and for a moment I thought maybe there was something to rebuild. The next morning, he left a note on the kitchen table. It said he had scheduled a counseling appointment. He wanted to go once and see what it felt like. I stood there staring at the words, unsure if I should feel hopeful or afraid. I didn't know what the session meant to him. Maybe he saw it as closure. Maybe he saw it as a way forward. I didn't ask. I just agreed to go. We drove to the appointment in silence. Sitting in the waiting room felt like watching two strangers in a clinic they didn't belong in. The therapist was kind but neutral. She asked simple questions that felt impossible to answer. "Why are you here? What do you want out of this?" Eric answered first. He said he didn't want to make any decisions in the middle of hurt or anger. He wanted to understand how things fell apart. He wanted to see if there was anything left between us that was real. I said I wanted to be honest again. I said I was sorry. And I meant it, but it didn't feel like enough. The sessions continued for a few weeks. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we just sat in silence while the therapist waited for us to speak. Some sessions ended with a quiet ride home. Others ended with a small word or gesture that made the space between us a little smaller. But something inside me stayed unsettled. Eric was participating, but I couldn't tell what was behind his eyes. He wasn't cruel or distant anymore, but he wasn't the same either. He listened, he nodded, he answered questions, but I couldn't feel him anymore. It was like he had carefully drawn a boundary that I wasn't allowed to cross, and no matter how open I tried to be, I could never reach him fully again. One night after counseling, we sat in the living room. The television was on, but we weren't watching it. I looked over at him and thought about how much I still wanted to make things work. Then I wondered if he still did, and then I wondered if he already knew what he was going to do and was just waiting for the right time. That thought stayed with me longer than I expected. It followed me into the next day and the one after that. Even though we had agreed to try, I started to sense that something else was unfolding beneath the surface, something I wasn't part of. The hardest part was waiting to see if Eric could forgive, waiting to see if we could rebuild what had been broken. The uncertainty was unbearable at times, but it was the price I had to pay. There were nights when I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wishing I could undo it all, wishing that one mistake hadn't led to so much pain. Still, I kept showing up, to the sessions, to the house, to the quiet meals. I kept hoping the effort would matter. I tried not to ask too much. I tried not to push. I thought if I gave him space, he might return to me on his own. But I didn't know then that Eric had already made his decision. He was just waiting for his moment. Things were strangely calm after that morning. The tension in the house at that time was gone. It wasn't replaced with peace, not really, but there was something oddly structured about the silence that came after. Eric still said very little, but there were no sharp sighs, no slammed doors, no cold looks over dinner. It was like he had settled into a routine, one I wasn't a part of. He was up before me each morning, dressed and out of the house with his keys and bag, before I even stirred awake. At first I thought this was progress. I assumed maybe counseling had started to give him a sense of balance, or that he was working through it at his own pace. I didn't want to push too hard. The guilt still sat heavy on my chest every day, but I clung to the hope that the worst had passed, that maybe the recording had been his loudest scream, and now we were in the quiet part of rebuilding. I should have known better. I tried to keep busy, throwing myself into work and the few hobbies I still cared about, but nothing filled the emptiness. Every night I found myself scrolling through old messages, pictures and memories, trying to understand where it all went wrong. It was like trying to catch smoke with my bare hands. No matter how hard I tried, the truth kept slipping away. There were moments when Eric would look at me with eyes full of pain and confusion. I could see the love he once had fighting to survive, but it was buried under disappointment and hurt. I wanted to reach out, to tell him I was sorry, to promise I would never hurt him again. But the words felt hollow, and I was scared they wouldn't be enough. One Saturday morning, I woke up to the smell of bacon and coffee. It felt like a dream. That was the day everything shattered for real. I didn't expect what was going to happen that morning. It still feels like a dream to me. So guys, I came down the stairs and found him in the kitchen, flipping pancakes into 2 plates. His tone was neutral when he asked me to sit. I obeyed like someone expecting good news and fearing bad news at the same time. My hands were shaky slightly as I picked up the fork. The kitchen looked like it used to, warm and lived in. But something about Eric's composure felt staged. The way he moved, the way he served my coffee exactly the way I liked it. I smiled, unsure of what to say. He didn't speak either, not until I'd taken the first bite. Then he sat across from me and slid a small box across the table. It was a velvet ring box. For a second, I was confused. I looked at him, but his expression didn't give anything away. I opened it slowly and saw his wedding ring inside, the same ring I had placed on his finger years ago, the one that had not left his hand until the day I shattered everything. We both were silent for a few seconds before he spoke. His voice was calm, but indifferent. He told me he had spoken to a lawyer 3 weeks ago. The paperwork had already been filed. Immediately I was restless, but I couldn't interrupt. He wasn't raising his voice or making accusations. He was just finishing something. He told me the house had been sold. The documents were signed. The buyer was already making arrangements to move in. A friend of his handled the legal side quickly. I hadn't noticed because I wasn't looking. He said he had taken all of the joint savings. It was money he intended to use to move into a new place. After all, I haven't contributed a penny for the last 3 years. He had already found an apartment not far from his office. The rest of my things would be my responsibility. He told me counseling wasn't about rebuilding. He had agreed to attend because it made things smoother, less confrontational. He wasn't interested in trying to fix something that had been broken so deeply, so deliberately. The sessions had been for closure, not recovery. I sat confused in my seat. My mouth was dry. I felt like I had walked into a movie halfway through, only to realize the ending had already been written. My fingers gripped the edge of the table, knuckles turning pale. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. He told me he wasn't angry anymore. That was the part that hit me the hardest. He said he had already worked through the anger, the betrayal, the shock. He said the only thing left was acceptance. I had made my choices, and he had made his. There was nothing left to discuss. I finally found the strength to speak. I asked him why he hadn't told me, why he hadn't confronted me fully, given me a chance to fight for us. He just looked at me and said he didn't see the point, that the version of me he heard on those calls was enough to know where I truly stood, that the woman who laughed in the dark with another man was not someone he could trust again, no matter how many apologies followed. I cried then, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly. My tears fell onto the plate in front of me, untouched food now going cold. I reached for his hand without thinking, but he gently pulled it away. He stood and picked up his mug, took one last sip, and walked to the sink. He placed the mug carefully on the drying rack. Then he turned back and looked at me one last time. He said thank you, not with sarcasm or cruelty, but with a kind of tired honesty. Thank you for showing him what he needed to see. Thank you for confirming that he deserved better than what we had become. Thank you for not hiding it well enough, so he didn't waste more years chasing a version of us that no longer existed. Then he walked out the front door. No yelling, no slammed doors, no dramatic exit. I sat there at the same table where everything had unraveled. The breakfast he made sat in front of me, untouched and now cold. The ring box was still open. Everything was still, unnaturally so. I stayed at that table for a long time. Hours passed, maybe. I didn't move. My phone buzzed once, then again. I didn't check it. I didn't want to know what came next. I thought about the years we had spent together, the dreams we shared, the plans we made, and the countless little moments I had taken for granted. Now they felt like ghosts in the rooms around me, reminders of what could have been and what was lost. The weight of my mistakes pressed down heavier than ever, and I realized that forgiveness was a distant hope, something that might never come. In that stillness, I made a silent promise to myself, not to him, not to the past, but to me, to find a way to rebuild from the ashes of everything I had destroyed. It wouldn't be easy, it wouldn't be quick, but it was the only way forward. Update. Hello, Redditors. It's been 2 months since Eric said his final words to me at breakfast. I had to move out of our house since I was aware he sold it to avoid embarrassment. He didn't tell me outright that I had to leave, but he didn't have to. The way he slid the documents across the table that morning and calmly said it was no longer my home said everything. There was no fight, no yelling, just silence, and then the sound of me trying to hold back tears while I finished my coffee. After breakfast that morning, I packed what I could. I didn't take much, mostly just essentials and clothes. I didn't want to linger or make it more painful than it already was. The house felt cold, and walking through the rooms one last time made it sink in that my marriage wasn't just broken, it was over. All those late nights I thought were harmless, all those conversations with Jason I convinced myself didn't mean anything, they all led to this. Finding an apartment was hard. I was working with short notice, a modest budget, and a heavy heart. I finally settled on a one-room unit that was available immediately. It wasn't much, just a small space with plain white walls, a tiny bathroom, and a kitchen that barely had room for 2 plates and a pan. But it was mine, and at that point, I just needed a place to land. The first few nights were rough. The silence felt heavier than it had ever been. I had no one to talk to, nowhere to go, and everything reminded me of what I had lost. I couldn't sleep properly. I kept replaying everything in my head. The late-night calls, the breakfast moment, the look on Eric's face, the awkward tension with Jason at work. I was drowning in guilt, and it was everywhere with me. Then, about 3 days into staying in the apartment, a letter came. It was the official divorce papers. I had expected them, but the weight of seeing it in writing hit me like a new wave. Sitting in that empty room, signing those papers, made everything final. I cried. A lot. And when I was done, I just stared at the ceiling for hours, not knowing what came next. Work became impossible. Seeing Jason at the office every day was a punch to the gut. We didn't talk anymore. Not really. Just polite nods or pretending not to notice each other in meetings. Every time I saw him, I felt sick with guilt. Not because of what we did. We never even crossed the line physically, but because of what it symbolized. The emotional connection I had with him was what drove the wedge between Eric and me. I didn't cheat in the way people expect, but emotionally I wasn't faithful, and that's still betrayal. Eventually I knew I had to quit. I couldn't keep working there. I couldn't be around Jason. I couldn't keep walking into a place that reminded me daily of my choices. I handed in my resignation quietly and started job hunting immediately. It took a couple of weeks, but I found a new position at a smaller company. It doesn't pay as well, but the atmosphere is different, and most importantly, no one there knows anything about my past. Since then, I've been trying to build a new routine. Wake up, make coffee, go to work, come home, repeat. I'm not thriving yet, but I'm surviving. The apartment still feels empty, but it's slowly starting to feel like my space. I bought a small plant last weekend and a cheap rug to make it feel less like a box. It's not home, but it's something. Eric and I don't talk anymore. I guess there's nothing left to say. We've handled most of the divorce logistics through email and lawyers. I sometimes wonder how he's doing. I don't expect forgiveness from him, and I don't even think I deserve it. But I do hope he's okay. He didn't deserve the way things played out. He was a good man. He trusted me, and I broke that. There's no fairy tale ending here. I'm not rediscovering myself in some dramatic way or meeting someone new who sweeps me off my feet. I'm just learning to live with what I've done. Some days are better than others. I go to therapy once a week now, just trying to unpack everything and figure out how not to make the same mistakes again. I wish I had a happier update. I wish I could say everything worked out, or that I found some kind of silver lining. But for now, I'm just here, taking it day by day. The biggest lesson I've learned is that emotional dishonesty can be just as damaging as physical betrayal. You can lose everything just by giving your time, attention, and heart to someone else, even if nothing physical ever happens. Sometimes I still catch myself wondering what might have been if I had made different choices, but I remind myself that every step led me here, to a place where love is complicated but real, where forgiveness is hard but healing is possible, and where even after the darkest moments, there can be light. If you're in a relationship and find yourself emotionally attached to someone else, please take a step back. I didn't, and it cost me everything.